This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts here every week to keep you up to date on what is happening in the world of environmental health and what you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. We've talked a lot on our show about endocrine disrupting chemicals that are found in so many consumer products that we use every day, how those chemicals are found in all kinds of plastic, and how those chemicals are impacting our health, including our ability to reproduce. Today on Green Street, we're happy to welcome our longtime friend, Dr. Leo Trasande, a world-renowned expert on endocrine-disrupting chemicals, and who's been a representative to the UN's committee working on a worldwide plastic treaty for many years. Dr. Trasande will join us to talk about the emerging science and how it's impacting the international discussion on plastic. That's all coming up in a few minutes here on Green Street, but first, some of the headlines of the week. Patti, what do you got for us this week?
A new peer-reviewed paper that was published in Environmental Health analyzed data from major research studies and found that current human exposure limits for the wireless radio frequency, or RF radiation, emitted from cell phones, cell towers, and wireless devices failed to protect public health.
Yeah, we heard about this study.
Yep.
This is a big deal.
This is a big deal.
Yeah.
After analyzing the animal cancer findings of the $30 million U.S. National Toxicology Program, or NTP, study to determine the dose of wireless radiation associated with an excess cancer risk, the researchers concluded the limits needed to be strengthened by at least 200 times.
200 times more stringent than our current.
Correct.
Well, the current regulations were developed back in the 80s, Patti.
Yep.
On limited amount of science.
This risk assessment analysis was conducted by scientist Dr. Ronald L. Melnick, a retired toxicologist from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, or NIEHS, who helped design the original NTP study, and Dr. Joel Moskowitz, School of Public Health at UC Berkeley, representing the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. This study builds on recent systematic reviews commissioned by the World Health Organization, which concluded with high certainty that wireless RF radiation exposure caused cancer in animals. We are animals.
Yes,
Just
we are animals.
Note, we are animals.
Good point.
The researchers compared the levels calculated in these studies against the human exposure limits for wireless RF radiation exposure set by the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, known as ICNIRP, which are used by many countries.
Yeah.
So we knew this was coming because, our own NTP study showed that there was clear evidence of carcinogenicity,
Yeah.
and that's been running around for a while. And then the World Health Organization fairly recently came out and said, okay, we are going to say that there is a high certainty that wireless radiation exposure causes cancer in
That
animals.
NTP study we paid for, $30 million.
$30 million taxpayer dollars. Yeah.
And the FDA, which was originally had commissioned that study, came out and said, oh, this has nothing to do with humans. And you got to wonder.
Right, we were using rodent studies. We were using rats and mice, which is the standard
of course
for any studies to see whether or not there are risks to humans.
I mean, they really tried to say with a straight face, we spent $30 million of your tax money studying whether, rats should use cell phones. I mean, it was just ridiculous on its face. Anyway, go ahead.
Yikes. So people can actually mitigate their exposures by being extremely careful with cell phones, not holding them directly against their heads, not using a wired headset, but using an air tube headset, not sleeping with your phone anywhere near your bed, certainly not charging it overnight near your bed.
And wiring your house with Ethernet cables like we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not that hard.
No, hard wiring it's safe, it's secure, and it's fast.
Yeah, it's super fast.
Super fast.
And you don't have dropouts, and you don't have, that stuttering thing that happens sometimes. Somebody's on a wireless device.
And it's easy to do. On the back of the router that you have in your house, you can actually turn off the wireless.
Yeah.
And plug in the Ethernet cable.
Piece of cake. And we should also mention that, for people who are sensitive, I just want to emphasize again, we had that show a couple of weeks ago on EMR syndrome, which is that website they've set up for people who are, particularly sensitive. Really, really a great resource for those people.
Yep.
And also
our great cell phone cards.
Yeah.
These are, every kid in America should be handed a cell phone card in their health class.
And every parent.
Yeah. Let us know if you want some. We'll get them out to you.
I'm going to put a link to the card on our program website, which is greenstreetnews.org. Good. Okay, I've got a little bit of news about our national parks. Talk about drill, baby, drill. Trump opens the wilderness to big energy. From the majestic valleys of the Grand Canyon to the granite peaks of Yosemite National Park and ancient trees of Alaska's Tongass National Forest, U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to make America's federal nature reserves beautiful again. As if they weren't beautiful to start with, he's going to make them beautiful again. But
How is he going to make them beautiful?
He has a different idea of how to make them beautiful. Here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
National parks make up one part of over 600 million acres of U.S. public lands that span forests, deserts, waterways, and wildlife refuges. They include some of the most ecologically intact and biodiverse lands in the country. But critics say these landscapes are threatened by steep budget cuts and environmental rollbacks that open them to resource extraction, drilling, basically. Mm-hmm. In May 2025, for example, the Trump administration proposed cutting nearly $1 billion from the National Park Service budget, a reduction that park advocates warn could force hundreds of sites to close or sharply scale back services. 2 months after announcing the cuts, Trump signed an executive order devoted to improving national parks. So
By allowing them to drill?
While lyrically invoking natural areas that have inspired generations, it also called out land use restrictions that have stripped hunters, fishers, hikers, and outdoorsmen of access to public lands that belong to them. By casting nature conservation measures as impediments, there's a fear that Trump was flagging a bigger policy shift that opens more federally managed lands to mining, drilling, and logging. More than 40% of the total U.S. public lands have long been subject to oil, gas, and coal mineral extraction, including the so-called federal mineral estate that produces domestic oil and gas. But Trump is now focused on unleashing more American energy on public lands by rolling back ideologically motivated regulations, as he calls them, including environmental and climate laws, as he said in an executive order in January of 2025. So there you go. Rolling it back, and once they start drilling, it doesn't. You don't get that back again.
This is making America's parks more beautiful. Is that correct?
He said he was going to make
drilling operations.
He's making them beautiful.
Mining.
He's making them beautiful again. It's make America great again. Make the parks beautiful again was his pledge. So there you go. He's making them beautiful again. All right. Anyway, that's
making them beautiful for the oil and gas industry.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, what else you got?
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has proposed to remove air emission regulations from plastic pyrolysis plants, also known as chemical or advanced recycling facilities that essentially burn plastic to make fuel. What EPA is now trying to do is illegal, says Cynthia Palmer, petrochemical senior analyst at the advocacy group Moms Clean Air Force. If the proposal goes through, it means that pyrolysis facilities would have no environmental regulations except any state laws, she said. There would be no pollution controls, no air monitoring, and no reporting requirements.
Yeah, this is the playbook. Get rid of all the regulations.
Yep. Plastic pyrolysis incinerators are among the most dangerous types because they operate at the relatively low temperatures of around 300 to 900 degrees. Combined with a reduced level of oxygen, this promotes the generation of incomplete combustion products such as dioxins, furans, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons or PAHs, polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, and formaldehyde.
Yeah, these are terribly polluting.
All human carcinogens.
Yeah.
According to a recent study on plastics recycling techniques by U.S. Department of Energy scientists, between 0.1% and 0.6% of plastic waste that goes into a pyrolysis facility ends up in new chemicals or plastic, depending on the type of plastic waste. Worldwide, plans for chemical recycling plants have been dropping.
Yeah.
And existing plants have been closing.
It doesn't work. You can't recycle plastic.
But according to the 2025 Global Chemical Recycling Plant Counter, 6 chemical recycling plants were operating in the U.S. and 2 are under construction. In the past, the EPA has considered pyrolysis units incinerators. This law has strict emission limits and requires monitoring, reporting, and permitting for only 2 types of sources of hazardous air pollutants: incinerators and major sources. But if pyrolysis facilities are no longer legally incinerators, that means most of them wouldn't be regulated at all.
Oh, my God.
And you know that Congress understood this when they wrote that law.
Yeah, well.
It's curious that such a major issue is buried in a Federal Register notice dealing with an entirely different topic, said Judith Enck, former EPA regional administrator and president of the environmental group Beyond Plastics. Beyond Plastics reviewed EPA visitor logs and found that 16 plastics and fossil fuel industry members, including ExxonMobil, Dow, and the Plastics Industry Association, visited EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. on February 10th and 11th. Quote, "It is not known what was discussed at the February meetings with the EPA and the companies and trade associations," Enck says, "but the March regulatory changes will result in more pollution and should be rejected," end quote.
I can't imagine what they were discussing.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Well, you know what? It's up to everybody to cut their own consumption of plastic, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Anyway, stay tuned. Thanks, Patti.
You're welcome. Years ago, Doug and I met a young pediatrician who was advising then-Senator Hillary Clinton on health policy. A graduate of Harvard, where he received his bachelor, medical, and public policy degrees, Dr. Leo Trasande had a CV as long as your arm, and he was interested in what we were doing with our nonprofit. We quickly became friends, and over the years, Leo has become one of the world's most sought-after experts in the field of endocrine-disrupting chemicals and their impact on our health, our economy, and our society at large.
For many years, Leo has represented the Endocrine Society at the UN's Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic. We caught up with him the other day, and we started our conversation talking about his participation in the UN conference and what it feels like to be on the floor as we discuss the future of plastic. Here's our interview with Dr. Leo Trasande.
Intense energy underneath the surface with often uncertain outcomes. You know, it's remarkable to see how much progress the treaty's made. Everyone
Really? Okay.
in the media seems to say that it's a failure, or they try to spin it as there's a, blockade going on, which has some merit to the argument on that one. But health wasn't part of the treaty in a substantive way.
That's right.
In Senegal, before the first meeting in Uruguay.
Right.
I've had the benefit, the honor of representing the Endocrine Society through the process as an observer. You only get to observe unless you're on a country delegation. Let me be very clear about the distinction here. So you don't get the whole sausage-making process put in public before you, but you get to listen in on quite a lot. You get to see a lot of the dynamics. You get to interact with the players. And that's really important. And what we've seen step by step, meeting by meeting, even within the, basically the 3 iterations of the 5th meeting, right? We are going to stay indefinitely in a 5th meeting until the treaty is done in some way.
Okay.
And health is a very prominent part of the discussions right now, such that essentially we have seen health become a really prominent part of the treaty, with 90 countries insisting on it being a core component, almost primal, and particularly putting chemicals at the center of the treaty, because that's where the science is strongest about human health harm.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a good situation in many ways. You could argue that there's a chance that there is no treaty at the end of the process, but I would also refer you to Paris Accords.
Mm-hmm.
That took 15 years. That was not intended to be a 15-year treaty making process. And people will say, well, global organizations are dead. The UN is dead. The US is out. We don't really know whether any country is really engaged in the way they should be. And I would say that we just have to keep calm and continue putting the right data in front of people. And, last I checked, everybody has babies still. There are fewer babies being had in certain countries, and that's sparking a lot of concern. And a lot of people are suffering disease and disability from these exposures. So even if they're born, they're not living as well as they used to because of plastic. Now, I'm not here to undermine the reality is there are beneficial uses, essential uses, I'll call them, of plastic, but we've misbalanced the trade-offs. And I think that's where it's not surprising that you're seeing resistance, because there are countries and companies, and I use those interchangeably because some countries are acting like companies.
Yep.
There are countries and companies that are very much focused on keeping on the status quo.
And these are the fossil fuel producing companies. Am I right?
No secret that plastics come from fossil fuels. So, and this is the off-ramp for a lot of fossil fuel uses that are no longer in vogue, burning fossil fuels for energy. So we are at a watershed moment, but this is not a moment to back off. This is a moment to keep pushing.
A lot of this, Leo, has been driven by emerging science, right? I mean, we didn't know as much about EDCs 20 years ago as we know now. And health has kind of overtaken the plastic issue. Am I right about that?
It's fair to say that we have numbers, we have costs, that we have all the arguments that we didn't have before. Some of that was an effort to minimize exposure in lower and middle income countries, where plastic production is the fastest accelerating event. Now we have data. In fact, we have data newly out today as we're talking that we've supported, documenting 8% of premature births globally can be traced to plastic.
Ooh. That
means that babies die after birth, because some places in the world, if you're born premature, in the United, we forget that one of JFK's kids died early, born premature, back when we didn't have the technology to save babies the way we do. In the United States, we almost take it as an afterthought now, that if you're born premature, you're fine.
Yeah.
Not everywhere in the world is that true.
That's right.
And so the numbers in the range of 70,000 deaths a year. So it's not just a babies born less healthy to begin with and with a tougher road to staying healthy or living a long life. This is literally a life or death issue. So before that, we had published 13% of cardiovascular mortality due to plastics as well. So this is a cradle to grave and womb to tomb issue at this point. And that is a pretty compelling set of arguments that undermines what we heard early on, that countries saying that there are no health effects of plastic.
So let me just ask you a question. Are endocrine disrupting chemicals predominant in plastics as far as the formulation of plastics, or just plastics the most common exposure?
So you're asking a couple different questions, and I'm going to break them apart because nerds do that. So
good.
And so let's just be honest about what my intentions are, but they're good intentions. So if you are a negotiator in the plastics treaty and you see an estimate saying phthalates cost, this last paper suggests that $800 billion in lost societal value derives, by the way, from those years life lost, et cetera. But people will say, well, what percentage of the phthalates is plastic? Which might be a different question than the question you asked. It goes the other way around. What percent of plastic uses phthalates? That's a slightly different question.
Okay.
But if we focus for now on the mortality due to phthalates, 97% of the phthalates that are detectable can be traced to their use in plastic. And that's because a lot of what we used to think is not plastic is actually plastic. Nail polish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Paint. Plastic.
Lipstick.
Plastic.
Yeah.
So it's taken a little bit of time to really bring this into the spotlight in the proper way. That, nonstick cooking materials, plastic coatings. Those are plastic coatings full of fluoropolymers. So PFAS-based polymers, mind you.
Yeah.
So these forever chemicals that we say, well, they're water contaminants, not really plastic. They are plastic. Bisphenols, they're monomers of polycarbonate plastic, can linings, thermal paper receipts, and such. So for someone to say to me, well, this is not really a plastic issue, it's just plain misleading.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you flip the question around, we can have an interesting dialogue, and there are lots of plastics, and some of them have phthalates, and some of them have bisphenols, and some of them have PFAS, and some of them have other things.
Let me just ask you a question about politics. Of going back to the this global plastics treaty, has the makeup of the participants changed since the first one? Are more industries getting involved?
Of course they are, as observers, but they're observers have variable access to countries, right?
Yeah.
So we have a challenge put before us. The more the stakes get real for the industries that are going to potentially lose, the more there's resistance.
Yeah.
And the more they're showing up to at least even just listen to what's going down.
You're listening to Green Street, and our guest today is Dr. Leo Trasande, professor of pediatrics in the Department of Pediatrics and professor in the Department of Population Health at NYU Grossman School of Medicine in New York. I was thinking about what happened when smoking was linked to lung cancer, and a lot of that research was done at the university level. And in response to that, you saw the tobacco companies and the drug companies quickly start investing in universities' research programs, getting a seat at the table, if you will, to kind of discuss what gets studied and what doesn't get studied. Do you see that happening in this case?
Sure. I don't know specific examples that I can quote you, but I can tell you that there are lots of money influences out there. We all have to earn a living at some level, right? So I understand that that's a real phenomenon. And, people will say, well, you get NIH support or you get foundation support. We're very clear about what funds our research. There are ground rules for this. If they create a conflict that might perceptibly change your findings, that should be out there. Have I gotten foundation support from organizations that might want certain results a certain way? I suppose you can try to dot those I's and cross that T's. And I suppose that the National Institutes of Health wants impactful research. But I would say that we take great care, and the peer review process is an important and extra layer to further support freedom from bias.
Yeah. Okay. So Leo, we've been talking to a couple of people who have been doing research on organs in the body and the amount of plastic that they're finding. So can you talk a little bit about the plastics that are found in placentas and how that is impacting the newborns as far as actual plastic being in their bodies at birth, or, these endocrine disrupting chemicals?
Well, there's a lot of buzz about the presence of micro and nanoplastics in placenta. I can't tell you I really have a handle on how much truly there is across the general population, because we have a long way. Mind you, microplastics were first recognized 25 years ago.
Right.
In environmental samples. We barely scratched the surface of our understanding. We don't have standards still for many plastics. We don't have large population samples. The technology is subject to some criticism because some people will say, well, you burn fat, you get polyethylene signatures on the measurement device. All of those things are in need of investigation. So we have to let science cook sometimes. When it comes to chemicals used in plastic, we've had a 50-year runway plus for being able to study the effects. So it's a lot simpler. Can I tell you that micro nanoplastics are harmful by themselves? Not really. I can tell you they may be drug traffickers for toxic chemicals. Is it the plastic particles themselves that are wrecking balls? I don't know. Or is it just the chemicals? It almost doesn't matter. If you see the association of the micro nanoplastic with the outcome, or the chemicals used in plastic with the outcome, it doesn't really matter where the plastic comes from. Mm-hmm. At some level. So the New England Journal of Medicine published this paper showing that carotid atheromas with micro nanoplastic, PVC and polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride and polyethylene for your listeners, was associated with a 4-fold increase in heart attack, stroke, and death as a combined outcome. We had just published a year before that phthalates used in PVC plastic were also associated with cardiovascular mortality. To me, that's actually a pretty impressive combination of things together. Two threads of evidence giving you two different measures of plastic exposure, PVC plastic exposure showing the same effect. Each study is limited. It's an Italian study and an American study. The American study only measured a single time point of phthalate exposure. Okay, I get that. But you have consistency across the different methods of exposure assessment. That to me starts to push towards case for action. I'm not even going to debate causality. That's not the point. The point is not causality. It's when is enough evidence to act. And you don't need causality, perfect causality to act. Like in the Zika virus days a few years back, we used measures to combat Zika virus with very little evidence. And that was smart because Zika virus is a very bad thing for babies. Okay, I'm not a big fan of pesticide use in general, but there may be situations where that trade-off's worth it. You might, in the presence of a really bad virus, take care of business so that the vectors don't come with the virus. That's a debate we can have.
Right.
But in this case, there's not a really compelling use for non-essential plastic here.
Yeah.
Not a business case. We're talking about an industry that makes $750 billion a year, and the damage from heart disease alone is $3.74 trillion. Yeah. As much as, I should say, $510 billion to $3.74 trillion.
All right. So we figured out many ways to avoid plastic. We have zero plastic in our kitchen. I mean, it's amazing. And it took a long time.
You're impressive people.
Zero plastic. How do people deal with this information that's coming?
So it boils down to safe and simple steps we can all take. And I've said this 1,000 times. I'll say it another 1,000 times. They don't require a PhD in chemistry. They don't have to break the bank. So as you suggest, use less plastic. Glass and stainless steel are perfectly sustainable alternatives. I have right by me, I have a prop, a stainless steel water bottle that I take on my airplane that fills my water. It gets me maybe to LA from New York. Might not get me to Tokyo. Then there might be a discussion. I have colleagues who bring two, and that might get them to Tokyo. I've had moments I've had to go to the plastic water bottle occasionally. I get that. That's, you can't be perfect. That's the other thing. If you let the perfect be the enemy of the good, you're not going to do anything. But don't microwave or machine dishwash plastic. Eat less canned food. Eat fresh fruits and vegetables. Last I checked, those are a really good thing. Bottom line is that you can substitute out cast iron or stainless steel for nonstick cooking materials. They can actually be cheaper. You can filter your air. You can filter your water. That might be a little more expensive, but there are alternatives that aren't so expensive that might be reasonably good at that. And there are parts of the world where I worry less about PFAS. There are places in upstate that have much more, and even on Long Island that have some substantial contamination with water that would require more filtration. And well water is something to watch out for. Yep. So there are a lot of things to think about. And you don't have to do everything at once. I think that's the other thing. People if they want to be perfect, they don't have to be perfect. We know that simple interventions reduce exposure 30 to 50%. That's a big deal.
Dr. Leo Trasande, professor of pediatrics at NYU's Grossman School of Medicine in New York, world-renowned expert on endocrine-disrupting chemicals, and the representative of the Endocrine Society at the UN's Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic. You can learn more about Dr. Trasande and find links to his articles and books at our program website, greenstreetnews.org. That's going to do it for our show today. Special thanks to Dr. Trasande and all of you who listen to and support our Green Street show. Thanks for listening.